Hey guys, I did have this episode posted before and I'm reposting it because I am going to do a part two of being a people pleaser and wanted to bring this back. So make sure you listen to this episode and then tune in for the upcoming episode for the part two of this one. Thanks again. Bye. Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. Have you ever wondered why lemons are so sour? I don't know if anyone else learned this in school, but I learned that fruits are produced by plants so that animals can eat it and spread the seeds around, and then that fruit can regrow in a new place. However, a lemon is not a naturally occurring fruit. That's why it's sour. It's actually made by mixing a sour orange and citron. And the sour orange itself is made from a pomelo and a mandarin. So lemons are not the product of evolution, but actually just selective breeding that humans conducted. Similar to lemons, the topic of today may be a little bit sour because it's about people pleasing, but let's dive right in. For my story of the week, it's inspired by a TikTok I saw of a woman explaining how her setting boundaries led to the end of one of her friendships. Her friend is a single mother whose baby she has watched in the past and babysat. She herself has no children. One day, her friend asked her for a favor, and when she asked what it was, her friend called her and said, "Hey, I'm at your door with my baby. I would like to go out tonight, but don't worry, I'll come back at 10 p.m." And the friend actually didn't come back until 1 a.m. Mind you, the friend never asked her in advance. She just was already at the door and essentially just gave her the baby. When the friend comes back, this woman complains to the friend and says, "Hey, it would have been nice to give me a heads up before you just brought your baby here and then just left on your way." But the friend blocked her and uploaded some subliminal messages. In this situation, clearly, the friend who's a single mom is using her status as a parent to mistreat her friend. She didn't leave any time for her friend to say no. She just showed up with her baby, then took advantage of the friend by not coming back until 3 hours after the time that she said she would. The friend without children felt like this was selfish of the single mom to do because the single mom felt like her time was more important than her childless friend, even though she made that decision to have that child. Her friend did not make that decision for her and has actually helped her out a number of times. Where this story relates to today's topic is that the person without the child should have said, "No, sorry, I'm not available to watch your baby." Would it have been weird to say no since her friend and her baby were already at her doorsteps? Of course, that is weird. But it's also weird for someone to just pop up at your house and just basically give you their baby and go. As someone who's been a people pleaser, I've noticed people take advantage of you sometimes, and part of it is making it seem like there's an emergency going on. The single mom is there at her doorstep. So I think the friend without the child felt like she couldn't say no because things were happening right then and there and she didn't have any time to actually make any decisions. When she finally spoke up after she helped, the mother turned on her and blamed her for an issue that she did not create. So today, I want to talk about the emotional labor, quiet burnout, and eventual freedom of the people pleaser's path to self recovery. Buckle up, listener, because this one will be a doozy. Before I jump into the meat of this, I want to define a people pleaser in my own words. To me, a people pleaser is someone who will say yes to everyone and forget themselves. Ultimately, it's not a bad thing to please people, but you have to learn to manage it. And as the eldest daughter of an African immigrant household, people pleasing was fundamental in the way I was raised, unfortunately. What are some of the signs of people pleasing? Now, this list is about things that you do all the time, not just sometimes. Not every person who's a people pleaser will do everything on this list. It's just a sample of behaviors that can become people pleasing if you do it regularly. For example, saying yes when deep down you want to say no, having a fear of conflict, rejection, or disappointing others. More importantly, needing validation from others. It can also be over apologizing or dismissing your own feelings because you don't think they are as important as the person who you are trying to please. At one point, I thought being liked meant being a good person, but it cost me my peace. When it came to family, I thought being needed and fulfilling that need meant I was a good daughter. But what I didn't know was that I was allowing people to use me however they wanted. When I spoke up about being hurt by their actions, they didn't care, and nothing would change. My hurt didn't matter because I was still meeting their needs. So why would they care or change? But I was a people pleaser because I kept trying to meet their expectations despite the way that I was feeling. Another sign is taking the blame for things you didn't do, or always going along with others' viewpoint of you, and not really having your own distinct viewpoint of yourself, because then you are allowing other people to define who you are. Another thing here is trading favors, your availability or gifts for friendship or attention. Being a people pleaser, at least in the beginning, you get a sense of goodness from it. You feel good that you helped someone or made them happy, and you tie that to your value as a person. Now, I've given you an example of a people pleaser as part of the story of the week. And that story didn't end well when the people pleaser finally decided to speak up. And in that situation, the friend never said, "Hey, I'm not going to watch your kid again." She just said, "Hey, do you mind just letting me know next time you want me to watch your kid in advance? Because I could have had plans that you didn't know about." But the assumption that the single mom had that her friend should just be available just because she doesn't have kids, she wanted her to people please her. Another example, I had a friend who always wanted to meet around where she lived, but never wanted to come to my place or never wanted to kind of meet in the middle. It was always somewhere that was convenient for her. But at the time, I was afraid of confronting my friend because I didn't want her to be mad at me. So I just kept sort of going with that and going to her place or near that place while brooding in the back because I knew that it was unfair, but I didn't know how to bring it up without her being mad at me because I wanted to please her. And I didn't want the friendship to end if I spoke up. Or another example is maybe at work, you may have been someone who always says yes to a new assignment that your boss wants you to do, even if you already have a full plate. You've probably felt like you have to say yes because that's your boss, and you fear retaliation or you fear you might get fired. Or actually, on the other hand, you might also think, oh, if I say yes to everything, then this is going to be the way for me to get promoted, even though you don't know if any of that is going to happen. I've been in that situation too. And honestly, it's just exhausting. There's such a huge emotional toll when you are a people pleaser because, again, your emotions are in the background. You don't front your own emotions. You try to manage everyone else's. Are they mad at me? Are they happy with me? Are they satisfied with what I did? So, everyone else's emotions is the thing that you're always thinking about versus thinking about, well, how do I feel about this? What do I want to do? And that emotional toll can be very exhausting, trying to just run around and make everyone else feel happy. You don't have time to think about if you're happy or if that's what you really want. You can start building resentment against the people who you are pleasing because you're not being reciprocated in that situation. You may feel a loss of identity. In my case, I didn't really know who I was for a very long time because I never really thought about what I wanted. Everything I did was to make someone else happy or someone else feel comfortable. Never thought about my needs though. And people never asked because I guess it didn't matter to them. Not everyone, but some people. I especially want to say for children who are girls, like I said, eldest daughter or eldest kid, you could be an eldest son. Sometimes we're raised to placate other people, to appease other people, to not question. And that in itself leads to that loss of identity. I want to say as well, tied with that is yes, of course, you can be manipulated into being a people pleaser. One way is if you grew up that way in your household, things were done a certain way, you were taught to behave a certain way. You could be manipulated into this through work, like I said, or through a romantic relationship, whatever it may be. But at some point, you start to see the facade. You see that something is not quite right. And you may ignore it for a long time. I did. And that is dismissing a huge red flag. But I don't care if it's family, romantic relationship, work, friendship. At some point, we do need to admit, as the people pleaser, that we are also playing a role in that dynamic of people pleasing. One of the things that I realized was that I was an enabler. I'd been manipulated and kind of conditioned over the years, but I was part of the dynamic that was making me feel upset. I was part of these dynamics that were making me feel like I wasn't myself. And that was really, really hard to admit. I talk about mindset change here a lot and shifting how you think about things. That was my point essentially when I realized that now I'm an adult. When you're a kid, obviously, it's much harder to understand these things, or it's much harder to break out of the dynamic because you're reliant maybe on your parents or whoever it is, right? But as an adult, yes, we can acknowledge that we maybe have some trauma about the way that we grew up. At some point, though, you're an adult and you have to now be responsible for either healing from that or figuring out a way to live your life. And one of those ways as an adult for me was, like I said, finding out or discovering, I should say, that I was an enabler. I continued to fuel these people into mistreating me. So I had to be the one to change. And whew, that was not easy. Like I said, I'm a recovering people pleaser, so still on the journey. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the moments that sparked some change in me. I mentioned being a people pleaser, eventually you get an emotional toll. And one of the things that happened to me, a few things, depending on the relationship that you look at, that happened to me were either I had a breakdown or I just burned out. And both of those avenues led me to really thinking about, well, what's on the other side of this? The first thing is I started therapy at one point, and this was my very first therapist. I would explain the things that were going on, the things that people were expecting of me, and she would just ask me questions that I really never asked myself because I felt guilty asking myself these things. It was really one of the first time that I told someone truly how I was being treated in some of my relationships. And it was the first time that I really questioned some very core dynamics in my life. Because up until that point, I thought people pleasing was what I was supposed to do, even though it made me feel miserable and uncomfortable. So during one of our sessions, when I had to make a decision regarding an ask that someone had asked me, she said, "So, what do you actually want to say to this person?" I said, "I want to say no to this request, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid of being disliked. I'm afraid of being talked about. I'm afraid of being yelled at. I'm afraid of some hypothetical negative thing happening." But being afraid in that moment actually wasn't very kind because that kind of fear creates resentment, which is where I was headed. In that situation, actually, I ended up just going with the ask. At first, I had said no, and then the person who asked me kept berating me about it and broke me down, and then I just complied with that. And then I felt guilty towards myself because I knew that that's not what I wanted to do, but I still played into the game, into this hand. And in the situation I told you about earlier, where I had a friend who essentially always wanted me to go where she was and never really put in the effort to compromise or even just come over to the area of the city that I lived in, I started thinking about, well, why should I comply? It's not like I'm being forced to go there. Of course, I want to hang out with my friend, but this is just really annoying. But I thought if I all of a sudden stopped hanging out with this friend or declining the invitations, then I would be a bad friend, even though I'm the one who was in this situation. And I was thinking, why hasn't my friend made any effort to balance things out? I always thought I wanted to keep the peace and I didn't want to make her mad. But I got to a point where I was very frustrated. And I was like, well, I don't want to be the only one who's frustrated here. I don't care if that seems petty, but I'm over this. She kept getting all the benefits of this, yet I was the one annoyed by the situation that I kept going along with. Like I said, it's not like she held a gun to my head. So I then started thinking, well, if I don't change, this situation won't. Again, that was me being an enabler because I would go to her place. I would say yes to the hangouts, even though I didn't want to, or even though I wanted it to be in a different location. So I was playing a role in that as well. And that was something that I had to bring up. Another example, actually, of some work stuff that happened during the George Floyd protests happening across the US. I was the only Black person and person of color working in my office. My boss at the time asked me to give everyone in the office, I kid you not, a list of readings and resources for them to, I don't know, learn more about this situation and the history of the plight of Black people in America. There are a lot of issues with this boss, but I simply did not do it. I did not want to do it. And honestly, now that I mentioned that again, don't cancel me for saying this because I'm about to go on a side note. But this, frankly, the audacity of this white woman, dare I say, the white audacity to say that to me was crazy. She wanted me to be a mule for her ignorance to make herself feel better. She wanted me to provide free labor in a situation where I should have been the one being comforted after seeing a Black person being killed slowly for 8 minutes on camera. Also, I'm African. I don't have the same history as Black Americans, so I wasn't even the right person to be coming up with said resources. But that was just crazy. I absolutely did not do that for her or anybody else. In fact, I resigned shortly after that because I was not about to be continuing to deal with her BS. That was crazy. And I had been people pleasing for so long and placating even her so many times before that. Even when I absolutely should not have been, even when there should have been an HR. This was a small company, so there really wasn't an HR though. Ooh, goodness, I'm frustrated all over again just thinking back to that. But it's things like that. People will blatantly try to play in your face. And I'm glad that at that moment, I had already been working on being a recovering people pleaser. So I would have been out of my mind to do something like that. It was moments like these that really fired me up to not please people anymore. I was just over it. And I looked at my life at the time and I was like, there are so many examples of this at work, in my family life, in my friendships, where I'm just pleasing everyone. That's when I was, again, I realized I was an enabler in these situations because I'm allowing these people to continue to play in my face like this, even though I recognize that I have a problem with these dynamics. But when I looked at all the parts of my life and I saw that, I was like, yeah, I definitely need to get my life together because I have multiple relationships in multiple parts of my life where I am people pleasing and I feel like I'm drowning here. And I don't even know who I am at this point. And like I said, I've had jobs where I've said yes to a lot of work because I felt like that would prove my worth to them or would help me get promoted. But what I realized afterwards was that doing more work or finishing your work early to do more work just gives you more work. You do not get rewarded for doing the most at work because they're going to see that you're willing to do that and then they're going to take advantage of it. Think about that, especially in places like corporate America or even if you work in retail, right? They see these things and if they could pay you as little as possible, most of these places, they would, as little as possible to get the most effort out of you. And I've been burned before, and I was really trying to learn from that. But overall, maybe realizing you don't know who you are. So, like I said, you can burn out or have a breakdown, like I did several times during my people pleasing discovery. But maybe you've realized you don't know who you are because you've done what other people want, even though you don't really want to do it. And that really sucks. But people pleasing, getting out of these dynamics doesn't need to be dramatic like it happened with me. You could have simple conversations with someone who you care about. And I'll give you some tips on that a little later in this episode. But honestly, when you start on this recovery journey, And anything else with self improvement, it doesn't always feel like self love at first. Y'all, I have felt so much guilt, so much fear, so much loneliness from setting boundaries that I've never had. That's the challenge of these types of things. I would set a boundary, then go over it because I felt like, oh no, that person pushed back. When I started trying not to be a people pleaser, when I would say no, some of those same people that I was pleasing for years earlier suddenly called me rude or mean. They'd say I wasn't acting right. They talk behind my back. They still talk behind my back. Can you believe that? I'm just in these people's minds like that. And I know that because the people that they bash me to tell me, but I put a stop to that. I don't want to know. I don't really care. Because these people have shown me that they were always pretending. They've shown me that they never really liked me, anyways. There are other people who have responded well, and my relationships with them have thrived. So it's not that everyone's going to all of a sudden turn on you because you decide to put some boundaries, but the ones who turn on you, they've shown you exactly who they are already. And honestly, you're probably better for it for not having those relationships. It's not always bad, though. There are some unexpected joys of breaking this cycle. You have more peace, you have more self trust. You can build deeper relationships without the fear of people pleasing and all of that. You can learn to disappoint other people without abandoning yourself. Also, you can learn to say no without an explanation. No is a complete sentence. And I know a lot of people don't think that or try to step over it, but that's true. And you can always celebrate the small wins. You can celebrate the first time that you spoke up, the first time you didn't pick up the phone right away or text back right away. Probably the first time you just felt free to be yourself. I used to feel like I needed to be liked by everybody, but ultimately, I don't feel that way anymore. I am not here to be liked by everyone. Of course, we can be loved by our family and friends, all that good stuff, but it has to be mutually beneficial. It can't be, well, I will only say I'll love you based on the things that you do for me, or based on the fact that you do everything that I want or listen to everything that I say. And it might be hard to understand, but as an adult, we should all be aware that not everyone is going to like you. Because think about it, you don't like everyone that you encounter. So it's only realistic that not everybody you encounter is going to like you either. It's a hard pill to swallow, though. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I do want to give some tips and tricks on some of the ways that I have learned throughout this recovery period of being a people pleaser. Because there are many ways to work on these things, just like with anything else. It really will ultimately depend on you and what you feel most comfortable with. The first thing I started off saying was, for me, part of my understanding of the fact that I was in these types of people pleasing relationships was firstly by going to therapy when I was younger, but that's not the only way. I'd say confidence is huge here. The more confident you are, the less and less people can push you around. And so is self reflection. That way you're aware of these dynamics because I didn't really know that that's what was happening. You could journal and start asking questions like, what do I want to do? What do I like to do? You could learn to pause before saying yes to something. You are not Superman, okay? Relax. Practice saying no to some things and no to other things. People, especially if they're adults with no developmental challenges, can function without you needing to jump in there. But it will take you being more deliberate in what you accept and what you don't. It could be accepting a bunch of different hangouts, even though you're really tired. You can learn to say no to some of those hangouts. It could be someone's always calling you, asking you for advice, and it makes you exhausted because you're now dealing with their emotional stuff on top of your own. Maybe you try to change the subject during those or say, hey, I got to go real quick. That way you don't elongate the conversation. So it could be little things like that. Let's say at work, you have said yes to some additional assignments because you're at work. But when you notice that your workload is full, you could learn to say something like, oh, apologies, I don't have capacity, or my project is full at the moment, but let's circle back when I complete some of these. Something like that. That way you're not saying no, but you're acknowledging some of those things. Obviously, then it depends if your manager wants to listen to you or not. But I do think saying something like, my project is full at the moment, let's circle back, I don't think that's a no. And I think that goes over better. Let's say a friend of yours always asks you to pick them up from the airport. You don't mind picking them up, but they never offer to pay gas for you driving 45 minutes each way to get them and drop them off. And you're a little annoyed by that. Maybe you could start saying, hey, friend, can you Venmo or Zelle me $20 for gas? If it's a good friend, they'll say, sure, let me send that over. And now the problem has been solved. Now you've started something where they have acknowledged, oh, yeah, I should probably pay for this. If they're not a good friend and they complain or they refuse, then maybe you don't pick them up the next time they are at the airport. You can say something like, hey, sorry, I'm actually not available to pick you up at that time. Hey, sorry, I'm going to be busy doing XYZ at that time that you land. Because now they've shown you, and you're not doing something malicious. What's malicious is your friend being greedy and not even giving you a couple dollars for gas, despite the fact that you're spending almost an hour and a half essentially being their chauffeur. You're not asking too much there. And I think sometimes, even for me, when I started building boundaries, I felt like, oh, I'm doing a lot, I'm asking for too much. And it's probably because you've never asked for anything from this person before. They have always taken, you have always given. So the one time that you decide to ask something, even if it's really small, it might seem like a really big deal to you. And it is, because this is the first time you're attempting to change this uneven dynamic. If you've been a people pleaser, as I mentioned, you've probably gotten fulfillment from feeling like you've helped someone or you've made things easier for them or that they need you. There's nothing wrong with wanting those types of feelings. It's just if it's happening all the time, that's an issue. And that's maybe where you feel like your worth comes from. Well, I'm here to tell you that's a lie. You tell yourself these things because it's a way to cope with the fact that your friends, family, boss, or even romantic partner might not care about you like you care about them. So question your yeses. If you say yes out of fear, guilt, or obligation all the time, ask yourself, do I even want this? Am I okay with this? And it's okay if the answer is no. Like I said, a lot of this is a mindset shift. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. Everyone else is choosing themselves. So you should choose yourself too. And again, choosing yourself doesn't mean you don't care about anyone or you can't compromise or let someone get their way sometimes. It's more about not compromising yourself all the time for the sake of others. And especially when deep down you suffer and are hurt by these things, or you always regret your decision to sacrifice yourself for others. You being bothered or in pain about the decisions you've made for others is the issue here. Because ultimately, how can you show up and be the best version of yourself if you can't even speak up about yourself? Like I said, it's totally okay to go out of your way to do something for someone else. We all do that sometimes. That's a part of having different relationships with different people. That's part of being in a society. And we should all do that sometimes. I want to emphasize though, just don't make it a habit because you will forget about yourself. It's okay to acknowledge that you deserve comfort too, because you were raised to put everyone else's comfort before yours. Say to yourself, my peace matters too. In the story I told about my friend and how I was always going over to her place and she never came to mine, I brought it up one day. We just had a simple conversation. But I brought it up one day and invited her to an event on my side of the town. And she started sort of saying, oh, that's really far. And I said, wait a minute, but let's think about the last 3 times that you and I have met up. Where have we met up? Okay, closer, either at your place or closer to yours. But whenever I bring something up that's closer to mine, then you have an issue. And I'm just trying to understand, is there something up there? If there's an issue, I do want to know, because I'm kind of getting annoyed at having to always come here when you've never even gone over to my place one time. And she felt bad. She apologized. And after that, when we would plan meetups, I'd say, oh, your place is kind of far. Can we meet closer in the middle? And she would say, sure. So in that case, there was no drama. And of course, I still went over to her place and all of that, but it became much more of a compromising situation, not one extreme to the other. There was no drama. When I started speaking up about these things, it started changing. But me pushing the envelope there helped us have a better friendship. The other thing, too, in terms of a tip, is practice saying no without over explaining yourself. Woo, this is one that I still struggle with sometimes, even now. As long as you are not being disrespectful, you're allowed to say no, especially as an adult. Not every no needs an answer. You might say things like, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not available, or sorry, I can't help. And you could just repeat that to yourself. Actually, I saw an example where someone's older sister loved asking to try his food when they ate out as a family. The older sister did a lot for the younger brother, but the brother didn't like sharing his food. He felt that he was obligated to. He felt like he wasn't allowed to say no because his sister helps him out a lot. But eventually, he got the courage to talk to his sister about him being uncomfortable with her always asking for his food when they were out to eat. How did he do this? Well, first, he practiced saying no in his head a lot of times. Then he practiced saying no in front of the mirror. That way, the word no became an option for him because it wasn't that before. And even when he first said it to his sister, it felt weird, but at least the practicing helped him get ready for the situation. And it turned out that the sister was completely fine with that. No drama, no nothing, no pushback. She said she just likes to try different foods, but she gets that not everybody wants to share their food. And after that, sometimes he would even still offer her something. I think it's totally fine for us to offer somebody something, but if they're always expecting or always asking and we feel like we can't say no, that's where the issue comes in. So it's great that this young man was able to resolve this very quickly with his sibling. No hard feelings there. So again, I've given you a bunch of tips around this, and when you're recovering people pleaser, it's going to take, for me, it took years. I'm still in recovery, but it's slow. You shouldn't expect things to change right at the first day, especially because you may not feel most comfortable pushing back on some of these things. But again, you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to care deeply without carrying the weight of everything. You're allowed to choose you, especially when everyone is choosing themselves and looking out for their best interest. Remember, you are not in charge of managing other people's emotions, especially when no one is managing yours. And as an adult, it's of course okay to look out for your best interest too. So remember, being a team player is good, but you are also on the team. So sacrificing, quote unquote, yourself for the team doesn't actually help the team at all because one member of the team, you, isn't being taken care of. It's not a bad thing to please people. It's good to be helpful and build positive relationships. Relationships can be a give and take, but you have to set boundaries, manage your time, and prioritize. I'll end it there for today, but one question I have that I want you to think about or leave in the comments is, what's one boundary you've set in the last few years that you are proud of today? Thanks for listening to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels. Like and subscribe, leave me some comments, and let me know what you think about this, or if you have any additional tips on being a recovering people pleaser. Cheers to your lush life, and see you later.